Looks like we're up and live on Facebook, I believe. We're going to go ahead and get things rolling. Welcome tonight and good evening. This is a citywide conversation regarding the Beltline Transit Study. And we thank you for your participation in our virtual meeting. My name is Nathan Soldat, and I'm the Director of Community Engagement for Atlanta Beltline, Inc., also known as ABI, and we are the organization responsible for implementing the vision of the Atlanta Beltline. We've enabled live transcription, and if you'd like to view this option, please click Live Transcript at the bottom of your screen to select your preferences. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and provide a quick overview of the meeting format for tonight. Right now, we have 79 attendees on our Zoom platform. We're also broadcasting live to Facebook. If you're watching on Zoom or Facebook Live, you can follow along at the agenda at the top of each slide. If you're listening by phone, no worries, I'll just walk us through the agenda right now. We're starting tonight with some logistics, a welcome. We're going to follow this with some audience polling to get a sense of the room. And then we're going to ground everyone with a Beltline 101 so that we're all on the same page about the Beltline project. After that, we'll get to the heart of why we're here tonight, which is the presentation on the Beltline Transit Study. A little bit of housekeeping here. Please do not place questions in the Q&A box until we get to that portion of the agenda. Questions placed in the Q&A box prior to completion of the presentation will be dismissed to ensure that everyone has an opportunity to hear the presentation without distraction. No worries though, we haven't lost your question at that point. If your question has been dismissed, you can go into the answered section of the Q&A box, copy it, paste it back into the live portion, but don't do so until the Q&A box is live again for the presentation completion. In other words, let us get through the presentation. We may answer your questions before we finish. That said, you probably noticed that your line is muted and you'll not be able to share your screen during the meeting. And this is also to provide an excellent listening experience for everyone on the line. A recording of the meeting tonight, the presentation, and all the supporting materials will be made available online at beltline.org/meetings. If you're having technical difficulties during the meeting, please email engage@atlbeltline.org. Should we encounter any technical difficulties, we certainly appreciate your patience as we sort them out. All right, so we're going to jump into the polling. This is, again, to get a sense of the room. And what we're going to do is we're going to ask about 4 different questions. So the first question tonight is really just, where you live. Are you in a Beltline neighborhood in Northeast Atlanta, Southeast Atlanta, Southwest Atlanta, Northwest Atlanta, perhaps a neighborhood in the city not on this list? Or maybe you're outside of the city of Atlanta altogether. About 87 attendees. And we are at 72% participation, climbing. Give folks just another second. And let's go ahead and close out that poll. So we have representation across the board with the highest representation coming out of Northeast Atlanta for Beltline neighborhoods. Next question. How long have you lived in your neighborhood? Categories include 1 to 5 years, 6 to 10 years, and 11 or more years. We're up to 91 attendees. We have 72% participation. Let's see if we can hit 80%. And we just did. Let's go ahead and lock that in. We have 54% of the room at 1 to 5 years, 13% of the room 6 to 10 years, and 33% of the room 11 or more years. Next question. What is your relationship to the Beltline? And this one's multiple choice. Grab a couple that apply to you. But let's go ahead and just cover those real quick. Are you a trail user? Are you a homeowner in a Beltline neighborhood? A renter in a Beltline neighborhood? A residential landlord in a Beltline neighborhood? A business owner in a Beltline neighborhood? Or a commercial landlord in a Beltline neighborhood? Perhaps you're a developer or a real estate broker or a community activist or advocate. Or maybe you just have a general interest in the Beltline project. So select all that apply. We'll give folks a little more time. We're sitting at about 72% participation. All right, 82% participation. We'll go ahead and lock that in. We have, and I'm not going to read the percentages because they're not going to line up on a multiple choice, but we have a lot of trail users, a significant amount of homeowners, All other categories are covered with a good amount of community artists, activists and advocates, and just a general interest in the Beltline project as a whole. So let's move on to our last question before we do a Beltline 101. So is tonight your first Beltline meeting? So this could be virtual, it could be pre-pandemic when we did a lot of in-person meetings. We're at 96 attendees, 82% participation. This one's going pretty fast. And we'll go ahead and lock that in. So I'll just read the number of 22 people who said this is their first Beltline meeting. So we want to welcome you all to the group. We almost always have at least one, if not more, individuals who are attending a Beltline meeting for the first time. And whether you're new to the Beltline or you've been around a while, the Beltline means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And for that reason, we always like to ground the room with a Beltline 101. And while I could probably spend the next half an hour covering this slide, we're going to be really high level in the interest of time. So let's just do a quick walk around the Beltline here virtually on the map here. So the Beltline, is originally this concept of reconnecting the different neighborhoods and communities of Atlanta that were historically cut off by the railroad infrastructure. It was an idea to connect through a series of transportation modes, including at the core of it all, Beltline Transit. So some sort of transit going around a 22-mile loop, connecting and using these old freight rail lines throughout 45 plus different neighborhoods. Trail was added onto that as a complement, and a lot of people know the Beltline through our trail system, which we're continuing to build out. We're connecting not just neighborhoods, but 1,300 acres of new green space. We have a number of spur trails. So if you want to think about the Beltline as a hub for the region, whether you're thinking about trails or transit, there's a lot of connectivity that's being created, including a lot of our complete streets that connect into and provide access to the Beltline itself. We're also connecting housing and jobs. We have a goal of 5,600 units of affordable workforce housing. That's to be completed in the 25-year implementation period ending in the year 2030. $10 billion in economic development. In addition to that, 50,000 permanent jobs on the Beltline and 48,000 one-year construction jobs are to be created by the year 2030. We have a massive arts and culture program. So we have free programming for the public, events, we have sculptures and murals, just a whole bunch of stuff going around year round, and the artists are paid for their work. It's really a very popular aspect of the Beltline. As we move around the corridor, we're also cleaning up a lot of contaminated soil. These were old freight railroad corridors. We had industrial uses that surrounded it. We had the freight rail itself. So there's also a whole cleanup aspect to this. Tonight, you're witnessing or experiencing part of our community engagement efforts. So whether we're designing or planning or actually building the Beltline, we always like to make sure that folks are in the know of what's going on and they have a voice at the table when we have a chance to design things and to really shape the future of the Beltline. All this is really important, and it's done through the lens of equity and inclusion. You can see that reflected in our vision statement, which is to be the catalyst for making Atlanta a global beacon for sustainable, inclusive, for equitable, inclusive, and sustainable city life. So that's a quick high-level 101. We're going to jump into the meat of this right now. I'm going to go ahead and introduce Sean Green. He's our principal engineer at ABI. He's also the project manager for the Beltline Transit Study. So the floor is yours, Sean. We're at 110 attendees.
Thanks, Nate. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for your time tonight, and hopefully we can relay some information. Again, this is a kickoff meeting for a project that we're undertaking. We're calling it the Beltline Transit Study. And really what it's doing is it's getting back at the overall vision of the transit on the Beltline, streetcar, light rail, connecting 45 neighborhoods, ensuring the connectivity, the access, the mobility, and helping us to continue development of our street without cars. Next slide, please. So to go forward, sometimes we have to go backwards and realize why we are where we are. And there's so many different things that have been done for transit over the course of time, Beltline specific. But the three critical ones that I just want to make sure everybody's aware of are basically, this is the enabling legislation for the Beltline tax allocation district. This is from 2005. And you can see the link here at the bottom. So if you want to go and read that at some point in the future, you'd be able to do that, or you could search by the ordinance number, which is over on the left. I know that it's probably illegible. So the purpose of this is not just to show anything other than that this exists. But from the perspective of just a small bit of reading, and I apologize, the first whereas clause in the red box on the left, whereas the council finds that the Beltline redevelopment area as a whole has been subject to some development, but has inadequate public transportation and transit facilities when assessed in light of the proposed redevelopment. And then it goes on, into the therefore clauses, section 13. The city hereby recognizes that the Beltline project, as described more fully in the redevelopment plan, which is a separate standalone document, you can find that on our website, is a complex long-term project that involves, among other things, the development of parks, trails, and transit along a 22-mile corridor. So from the very beginning, this tax allocation district, which is one of our primary funding streams for Atlanta Beltline, it was set up as a 25-year district, and the city council voted to support this and get the whole thing going. So that's the first thing that I wanted to kind of identify as foundational. Next slide, please. The second thing I wanted to identify was much more recently. This is the 2016, November 2016 More MARTA referendum. The More MARTA referendum came out for City of Atlanta residents. More than 70% of the city residents supported it with a positive vote at the polls. And so up in the top right corner is the map of what it was when it was voted on and where we've transitioned to over the course of the last couple of years as we've run through some escalations and costs and whatnot. But the intention here is really to show that the program exists. There's 70-something% of the population of Atlanta that voted to support it. And you can see in yellow a good chunk of the Beltline corridor within that top right map. So the Beltline has several projects within it. The first one that's coming, which is not really a focus of the presentation tonight, but I do want to acknowledge it, is the Streetcar East extension, which is supposed to be up and running for moving people around between downtown and up to Ponce, 2028. But we also have Beltline Northeast all the way up to Lindbergh. We've got Beltline Southwest, Beltline Southeast, Streetcar West extension. So these are a lot of projects that are in the More MARTA program still, and we'll see more on that at some point in the future. And the last is, next slide is the third foundational thing that I wanted to talk about is the Atlanta City Design Project, which came through the City of Atlanta City Planning Department. This was done in 2017. Again, there's a link in the bottom right corner. So when you download this presentation or view this presentation from our website, you'll be able to find that directly. But on the map on the left, and you can see the Beltline loop as the kind of the green teardrop shape right in the center of the city. And then on the right, this is just one excerpt from it that I wanted to talk specifically about. As you know, it points to a lot of different levels of transit, different service levels, whether it be local bus or streetcar and mixed traffic, or the third one from the bottom is actually specifically Beltline corridor, and then the upper example there is the MARTA subway, the MARTA heavy rail. So the city design is a very high level aspirational look at how the city is going to grow over the next 50 years, and how are we going to be able to do it in the context of equity, in the context of nature, in the context of ambition, and so and growth. Ultimately it's a growth plan. So all of that comes to say that's how, these are just three examples, but these are critical elements to it. And the Atlanta city design has since been adopted into the city charter, which I think is pretty critical in terms of us being able to follow the planning work that has been done. So on the next slide, thank you. You can see that Beltline transit planning has been around for a while. This image here comes from a 1961 plan from the Atlanta Regional Commission for the development of MARTA, one of the concepts that they came up with. That Sears building is now Ponce City Market, but the MARTA corridor that you see, the transit corridor coming across the page left to right, is the east side corridor of the Atlanta Beltline. And then you can see all the work that has been done by various entities over the course of time. The original thesis was from 1999. MARTA has done some transit studies before Atlanta Beltline Inc. was stood up in 2005, 2006. And you can see a lot of other things that the city of Atlanta has done, Atlanta Regional Commission, and then Atlanta Beltline Inc. has done a bunch of transit planning work over the course of that time, ultimately getting down to where we are right now at the bottom of the page. In 2023, we've got this project that we're kicking off tonight is the Beltline Transit Study. And then also kicking off soon is with MARTA and their final design contract for the East Streetcar extension. That will get up to this image right here geographically. Next slide, please. Going back to Atlanta city design, because this is such a critical aspect to why we are doing from the marching orders in 2005, but this is one of those statements that is patently obvious when read out loud, but it's one of those things that I think kind of needs to be said. Is the first premise of Atlanta city design is that the city is going to change, that not changing is not an option. Okay, we are going to see significant growth over the course of time. If the Metro Atlanta region goes to 8 million people and say 15% are living within the city of Atlanta, that's about 1.2 million people. Right now, we're at about 500,000. So you think about what that kind of growth is. And if we don't start to plan for that level of growth, by not only buttressing the MARTA system that exists, but by also expanding it with additional streetcar service and other projects that are in the More MARTA program, that's exactly what we're trying to get at here. And so on the next slide, you can kind of track the history of the city of Atlanta population-wise, which is the line graph going across across the screen there, left to right. But then also geographically what the footprint of the city of Atlanta is over time. And so you can see at the left when the city started out as just a railroad spike, obviously is a pretty small place, but as it grew and grew and grew, and some of the population growth is just due to the land acquisition, the annexation of land into the city of Atlanta. But then you can see the big dip that has happened since the 70s. And how we've rebounded to where we were back in the 70s. And now, based upon the information that I've been able to glean, we are now in Atlanta at the biggest population that we've ever had. So we've surpassed where we were at our peak in the 70s, 60s and 70s. And now and you can see that the slope on that curve, slope on that line is relatively steep there too. So the city of Atlanta was one of the fastest growing municipalities, if not the fastest, within the state of Georgia last year. So you guys can take a look at this. Again, the citydesign.com website in the bottom left, so you can take a look. It's actually a pretty good read. It's more of a coffee table book than anything, but totally worth 45 minutes to an hour's worth of time. Next slide, please. Thank you. So again, foundational to where we are and what we're doing. So we're doing the Beltline Transit Planning Study. Here we go. So I apologize, my voice with a head cold and whatnot, hopefully will last, but I've got hopefully enough water here to get us through the evening. Um, we're doing the study. This is a very high level planning study. I'm going to get more into the footprint of it, but we're looking at about 13 miles, 14 miles of Beltline loop. We're looking at, where does it go? So the northwest quadrant of the Beltline is not really defined yet from a transit perspective. So yeah, we've had a marketing map, if you will, for the purposes of explaining the concept of the loop. But this is where we're going to try to do a lot more, I'll call it plan engineering. It's planning, it's a little bit of engineering. It is, we're trying to get to like a 10% design where we can start to see, okay, these are what's in the way. These are things that we can't reconcile. These are critical impacts that are not acceptable. These are impacts that can be completely mitigated or partially mitigated. So we're looking at those type of things, but ultimately we're getting at, what is an alignment? Where do the stops go? Where are these stations? Are the assumptions that have been made over the course of the last 15 years still valid? Or are they, has development occurred that it makes sense to shift a proposed platform location, 500 feet, 1,000 feet, whatever, to tie in more directly with an activity center that didn't exist even 5 years ago, if you look at something like Lee and White. So that's the kind of stuff that we're going to be doing. And what our intention is to take the outputs and outcomes from this planning study, and then we can hand that over to our friends at MARTA, who can then run with it as part of the More MARTA program. The funding stream for this planning study is a $3.5 million project. 2.8 million of it are Federal Transit Administration planning dollars. So they can't be used for engineering and design. They cannot be used for construction, but they were leveraged from the planning side of FTA. And that the local match for that is coming from Atlanta Beltline Inc. So this is a fully funded transit study. There's a lot of work that's going to happen. It's going to be over the course of the next 2 years. But that's where we are. So next slide, please. And then I guess I also want to discuss, just so everybody has a better sense as to, roles and responsibilities, if you will. ABI in the middle here, we are kind of the steward of the corridor. We're the steward of the program of projects. And we do a lot of planning and implementation. We do all the trail construction with partners like Path Foundation, for example. So they've built some trail for us. They'll be building some more trail for us. We've built trail by ourselves, but we've relied on this partnership with the Path Foundation in terms of trails. The city of Atlanta, we are basically a daughter entity of the city of Atlanta. When I say we, Atlanta Beltline Inc. is kind of a daughter entity of the city of Atlanta. So you can see, how we are partnered in with the city of Atlanta, but then like Path Foundation is one of our partners that helps us to deliver trail network. MARTA is our partner to help us deliver transit network. And so ultimately MARTA they're the ones that control the half-penny sales tax funding stream. So all the revenue that comes in from that half penny over the course of the next, 35 years or whatever the number is, that's MARTA's revenue stream, and it's another investment by the city of Atlanta into MARTA, and to try to help push forward the ideals within the Atlanta City Design and the Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan, and the Atlanta Beltline Plan. So that's hopefully a pretty good at least overview as to how the three entities, MARTA, ABI, and the city of Atlanta, are working together, and working together in the context of Atlanta Beltline. Next slide, please. So again, this is a footprint of the Atlanta Beltline corridor. You can see some kind of light blue gray shading around roughly 3/4 of it. The southeast study area runs, generally speaking, from Glenwood Park down to Oakland City. with really the MARTA red gold line being the boundary between southeast and southwest. The southwest study area is generally from that MARTA line up to around Bankhead. And then the northwest, which is going to be the vast majority of the effort here, it has a really big study area because we haven't really looked at this in a level of detail since the 2012 really environmental impact statement and record of decision. So that's where we're going to spend most of the time on this project, is in the northwest. And that generally runs from Lindbergh down to Bankhead. So, you can see on the left what our goals are and our intentions are. We're trying to get to a preferred alternative and alignment for the northwest, and then we're going back to solidify or ensure that our assumptions over the course of time still remain valid, or if potentially there's a different perspective that we need to be taking into account because development has gone in a certain place and not in another, and some assumptions from 10 years ago may not, or I should say longer than that, but some assumptions need to be revisited. One of the things that is not being revisited, because we've done it on several different fronts, is the technology. All of this is being done in the context of streetcar light rail on the Atlanta Beltline corridor. So that is not something that we are going to be looking at. We're not going to be considering other modes. We are moving forward with a streetcar light rail transit technology on the Atlanta Beltline for this transit planning study. Next slide, please. And so in terms of project need, talked a little bit about this, but ultimately what we're getting at is, mobility around the corridor, safety around the corridor, and honestly, safe mobility, reliable mobility. That is, one of the things that if you are in a car on a daily, or even if you're not in a car on a daily basis, but you need to get somewhere, a lot of everybody's, I won't say everybody, a lot of people, their first impulse is to get in their car. My first impulse is to get on my bike. But there's not a day that goes by that I don't get some notice from one of the TV stations in town that all traffic on 285 is stopped. So when you think of it in the context of how do I move around the city reliably, safely, and be able to get to where I need, as the city continues to grow, we need to make sure that we are making investments in things that are not just roadway and car-based, that we are moving the needle on mobility, on access, on connectivity, and sustainability as well. So we have an amazing active transportation corridor with our trail network and the regional trail network that we're working to tie all together. And it's no different. It's just, well, it's the same thing, but different, maybe is the better way to say that. We're doing the same thing with transit as we've done with trail. We are trying to grow the network, trying to provide that access, trying to provide that mobility. Next slide, please. So like I said, this is a kickoff meeting, so there's really nothing to report out. What I'm talking about mostly today is kind of where we've been, how we got here, and then what our aspirations are for going forward with this project. So, public engagement has always been at the front and center of everything that Beltline does. This is no different. Ultimately, there's, an education element to what we do, as well as an information sharing. So those are two of the primary goals that we're going to move forward with as we move into public engagement and move into ramping this project up to full speed with the community. So you can see on the left that we've got, at least 4 bullets here representative of the strategies we have in place. But for example, the team was out at the Porches and Pies. I'm sure Pies and Porches, I forget, Adair Park a week or two ago, and that, this has already started, but tonight is our big kickoff where we get to pull, I don't know, I'm looking at around 120 people, 130 people together and get the same baseline information. We'll be doing more of these outreaches as we go. And like I said, this is roughly a 2-year project. So there's going to be a lot of opportunity for that. Can you hit the next slide, please? So the other thing besides community engagement that's front and center is our equity priorities. You guys can read this, but ultimately what we want to make sure is that, you know, the Beltline is there for everybody and that everybody has access to it. So there's a lot of different reasons that we do what we do. You know, the trail has been more successful than we could have ever hoped. We're expecting something similar with the transit network. So as we move forward, these are the equity priorities we're going to be getting at. And it's, you know, it's built on top of what already exists. It's not instead of. Let's go with that. Next slide, please. And so specifically, you know, what does Beltline Transit do from an equity priority perspective? Again, on the left, you guys can read, but basically, regardless of ability, regardless of geography, regardless of weather, regardless of wealth, you know, we get economic access, we provide economic access, we, excuse me. Sorry. We provide economic access, we provide for economic development, we provide for a way for people to move around that don't necessarily have the physical ability or desire, for that matter, to get someplace by foot or by bike, but they would still be able to access all of the amenities that the Beltline brings to the community, the greenway, the jobs, the bars, for lack of better terminology. There's all kinds of opportunity that the Beltline has brought with the trail that the transit will amplify. And then on top of that, the development that has come to the trail corridor, to the Beltline corridor over the last 15 years, has come with the promise of the transit system. And so from the perspective of, you know, parking ratios as to what they are, it's one of those tragedies in my mind, because we're in that transition of getting from, you know, a car-focused corridor, well, a car-focused city development plan to something that has a transit face to it. We've been working on this for a really long time. The development is not stopping. Atlanta is still growing. So we need to get this up out of the ground as quick as we can. And this study is going to be one of the things that helps to push information to MARTA and help to get that going. So next slide, please. Ultimately, the arc of this project is reflected here. We executed our contract at, I think it was May 30th. We're just kind of ramping this thing up. Project management plans. Again, we're in the Federal Transit Administration project construct, project management construct. So we've been taking care of a lot of the things that need to be done on the front side in order to run an FTA project, even though it is just a planning study. But over the course of, you know, like I said, 2 years, basically, we are going to be looking at possible alignments for the Northwest. We're going to be looking at station locations, ultimately trying to get to a locally preferred alternative for everything within the Beltline corridor that has not already been looked at by MARTA. So I think that is the last slide I have right now, Nate. If you can hit the next slide. Yep. Okay. I'm going to try to nurse my voice back for Q&A. I'm right here.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. We're going to do a little bit of polling as we move into the Q&A. So we have about 2 questions here that are related to the information you just heard. Please hold questions. If you place your question in the Q&A, it will be dismissed until we get to the actual Q&A. So please be patient with us. Dismissed questions are in the answered section. You can always copy it and paste it back into the Q&A. It's not lost forever. Everything you typed is still there. Jumping back to the polls. First question, was the information presented tonight helpful in building your understanding of the Beltline Transit Study? Yes, no, no opinion. About 56% participation in a room of 132 attendees. And let's go ahead and lock that in, 64, 65%. Most of the room said yes. A few folks did say no, and some folks also had no opinion. Hopefully, we've left quite a bit of time for the Q&A, and we'll be able to clarify anything that's not clear on what the study's purpose is. So next poll question. All right. Question is, or statement is, expanded transit options along the Beltline will enhance my travel experience in and near my neighborhood. Yes, no, or no opinion. All right, and we're at about 70% participation. We'll go ahead and lock that in. And we have 73% with yes, 20% no, and 8% no opinion. So next slide. All right, what we're going to do at this point is just kind of talk about how to participate in this conversation in the Q&A, and then we'll jump right into the actual Q&A itself. So we're going to answer as many questions live as time permits, but we may not be able to get to every single question given the audience size. And if that's the case, we will follow up with a written document addressing any questions we don't get to. And the turnaround time for the document will be based off of the number of unanswered questions, the complexity, etc. But once we've created it, it'll be at beltline.org/meetings. Our audience is made up of Zoom, online, and phone attendees, as well as Facebook Live attendees. Let's just review how you can contribute to the conversation. If you'd like to speak and you're on the phone, you can hit *9 on your telephone keypad. So this is like you dialed in and you put in the code, on your telephone keypad. At that point, if you want to raise your hand and ask a question or make a comment, just hit *9. That'll effectively tell me that your hand is raised. And once we get to you, your phone will actually prompt in your ear for you to hit *6, and that'll unmute yourself. The floor will be yours. If you're online, if you're on Zoom, you can start submitting into the Q&A box. I see a few folks have already done that. In addition, you can upvote other people's questions or comments by clicking the thumbs up icon. We do have a raise your hand feature available. We don't use it a lot for a group this size if you're on Zoom, because we want to prioritize our phone attendees who are not able to type into the Q&A box. But if we have the space, we will fit you in. Facebook Live, we know you're out there. There's a comment section below the feed there. Someone on our staff will be there to address your questions. And if they're unable to do so, they'll be able to basically elevate them to the larger group, and I'll be able to address them at that point. So that's how it's done. We have a good probably 50 or probably 45 minutes actually. So we're going to jump right in. I see we got a few questions. So I'm going to start right at the top here. It's kind of a long one. Comes from Howard. Let's see. Sean, you back, by the way?
I'm here. Yeah.
All right, let's go. All right. As Sean mentioned, there were assumptions made over the last 15 years. That said, technologies have changed dramatically, including e-scooters, e-bikes, hoverboards, Uber, Lyft, and rubber-tired autonomous vehicles, to name just a few. The Beltline has become an extraordinarily successful linear park, and economic development has not needed or required fixed rail to be successful. The 14-foot wide path is insufficient for walkers, joggers, and bikers, scooters, wheels. How will the building fixed rail alleviate the overcrowding pathways to ensure public safety?
So there's lots of things, Howard. Always good to hear from you, buddy. yes, there's been a lot of small technologies, but you know, there's fallout to all of those too. So if you use one of those Lime scooters, for example, and lots of people do it, and they'll just abandon them randomly. And so there is a debris field in a lot of places where the Lime scooters just get abandoned and it becomes an issue for everybody. We're also looking at loading of people. When you start thinking about what kind of person loading that we're trying to accommodate, we're not looking at Lime scooters, and even like technology like what Beep has going, right, with autonomous vehicles. They have, I don't know, let's call it an 8 or a 12 passenger vehicle running at the Brave Stadium now. And I assume that every single trip that they have is just, there's probably a line for it, and they just cannot accommodate the demand. And that's what we're not interested in that. Plus at, I don't know, $400,000 a vehicle for 8 to 12 people, the finances of that don't make any sense when you can get, a light rail vehicle that is a proven technology. It's not a new technology, but there are new technology advancements within the context of light rail and streetcar, such as, supercapacitors and batteries and off-wire running. So there's a lot of different things that are out there. To your question about how does this project add to the safety of the overcrowding, this project is not really trying to be a decongestant for some of the trail sections that are crowded, but there would be the potential for that element to occur when there are other ways for people to move around. But also, and again, tonight's presentation is focused primarily on the Beltline Transit Study, not on the MARTA East streetcar extension. But even on that, there's additional sections of trail that are being proposed, at least at the 30% plans, that would help with some capacity constraints that currently exist over on the east side. And one of the other elements that I probably didn't touch on hard enough within my presentation tonight is that not everywhere, especially in the Northwest, are we going to have trail and transit. In fact, very rarely are we going to have trail and transit parallel, because there's no abandoned railroad corridor. So the trail work that we've done over the course of the last 2 years for the Northwest is kind of agnostic of transit. This transit study is going to also be trying to figure out how to connect station locations for the transit in the Northwest to the Beltline corridor for the trail in the Northwest. So there's a lot of different things that are kind of moving around on this. And as we get more into it, we'll be able to get those questions at least more, maybe not fully answered, because we're only getting to like 10% design, but we're going to be able to at least programmatically start to really think about how that works. So I'll just leave that there, Nate, and just get on to the next one, and Howard can call me some other time.
Thanks, Sean. This question is for Wendy. Where can I access the results of the MARTA Northeast Corridor Transit Study?
Wendy, I thought that was up on our website. I know that there's some YouTube stuff out there, but if it's not on well, I'll tell you what, let me do this. I'll check in on the website and see if it's there or if it's not there, and we'll figure out a way to get that circulated.
All right, and this is from the Georgia Sierra Club Transportation Committee. One of the maps I've seen for this effort showed North Avenue as a streetcar route. Has that been changed back to the streetcar, or is it still going to be a bus rapid transit corridor?
No, that's fair. The streetcar system plan adopted by City Council in 2015 we called it the Crosstown Midtown, I think was the name of the alignment. And it was basically starting at the Bankhead Station on Hollowell Parkway and then coming across the city east-west and ending up on North Avenue to tie into the station there at MARTA, and then all the way out to the East Side Corridor. at North Avenue on the, between Ponce and New City. That is, has been considered by MARTA to be a BRT corridor. The More MARTA program did not have North Avenue streetcar as a project in it that I remember. And MARTA was looking to do something, so they pushed it as a BRT. But I hope I'm not getting into revisionist history there, but that's what I think I remember. But the North Ave BRT project, I believe, and you can check the slide that I had with the More MARTA program, but I think there's a little caveat in there about the BRT on North Avenue being parked as well.
Great, thanks, Sean. We're going to go ahead and move to our next question. This is from Steven. It's kind of a long one here, but you've alluded to the fact that there were assumptions made 15 to 20 years ago and a vote from 8 years ago, and said yourself, are these still valid? Is the downtown streetcar really the best method of transit on the Beltline versus an electric, quiet, no overhead wire, autonomous bus kind of technology? Also, all the photos do not show the wall, which will need to be next to the train for safety reasons. So if you want to address really those two questions, so, the renderings that are being used and why we use those for this presentation, as well as some of the assumptions on the technology itself.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, just leave the question there so I can look at it so I don't forget. So yes, there are assumptions in place. I said it myself, and the streetcar is an electric vehicle, so quiet, no overhead wire, autonomous bus. I think I already addressed part of that with the way that autonomous buses are set up in terms of the people capacity of it. But I will also say that I can't imagine that anybody is really interested in seeing a 26, 28 foot wide swath of concrete or asphalt put down next to the Beltline Trail, east side, west side, south side, wherever. You look around the country, Google Earth is an amazing tool for people to look at this stuff. The busways, just especially with adjacent trails, they don't feel right. They don't look right. They just feel empty and nasty. So to get to that point, this kept moving. So that's what I'd say, that the renderings that are in the presentation that I gave tonight are the aspirational renderings that we've built over the course of the last several years. You saw a lot of them along the West Side Trail. We did a bunch of renderings when we were doing some transit planning work, doing the environmental work back that we ended up stopping in 2017. So that's where a lot of those renderings come from. Excuse me. And there'll be new renderings that come from this study, but since we're just kicking it off, we don't have those renderings built yet. There is not a wall, so I'm not sure where that's coming from. There is a low safety railing that meets Beltline typologies, that if you're talking about the streetcar east extension, there is a low 3.5 foot fence with landscaping, and that fence is a stainless steel cable fencing that will blend in very nicely. And you can look at some of the MARTA presentations with respect to what that looks like in a rendered environment. Sorry, voice is going. I'm gonna just leave it there, Nate.
Yeah, no problem. So I'll say that looks like the answer you just provided should have addressed Matt, your question regarding the renderings as well. So kind of 2 for 1 on that one. All right. Let me know when you're ready here, Sean.
Yeah, go ahead. I just finished.
All right. This is from Patty, and we're going to take this question, then we're going to go to a live question, I guess you would say, from Lauren Miller. or one of Lauren Miller's friends. So, will this study identify where Beltline Transit connects with MARTA stations? Beltline Rail now has a list of proposed MARTA infill stations and MARTA stations to connect that I hope your team has seen and will consider.
Patty, good to hear from you. Yes, we will be looking at connectivity with MARTA on a couple different fronts. We'll be, because we're looking at such a big geography of the Beltline corridor and what could be Beltline corridor for transit in the Northwest. We are looking at the Bankhead MARTA station and how we best tie into it. We're looking at potentially Ashby with not necessarily a direct connection, but maybe an indirect connection, and figure something out there, whether that's a walking transfer, or if that is maybe that's an autonomous shuttle type of a situation. That would probably be a decent way to take care of that. We'd be looking to tie in at Oakland City, have some kind of a connection there. Don't forget the Summerhill BRT is coming. That's under construction now. So we'll be looking at trying to find a way to make the connectivity between the BRT and the Beltline streetcar as tight as possible. So those are just a couple. And then over on the east side, the study area it gets to Glenwood Park. It doesn't get across I-20 to the blue-green line that MARTA has on the east side. But the previous study took a look at that. So that's, I lost the rest of your question, so I can't refer back. I'm sorry, Patty. Oh, there it is. And yes, I've spoken with Matthew and Michael and a bunch of people from Beltline Rail now over the course of time, and I've seen what they're pitching, and we'll be taking. We were planning on taking a look at that anyways. Nate.
Thanks, Sean. Yep. All right. Lauren, you should have been prompted now that you should be able to unmute yourself and make your comment or ask your question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm more my main concern is living very close to the Beltline access. My access point is on the rail side. Is there a way to ensure that we keep most of the access points so that we can access the Beltline and not have to hop over rail and or spend an extra half mile getting to the Beltline?
Yeah, and that's a detail that's probably, depending upon if you live in, an apartment complex or a condo building versus, a single family residential with 50 feet of frontage. There's lots of different ways that's going to happen, but we are looking at maintaining all the access points. So again, this is a very high level 13, 14 mile study footprint that's not going to be looking at that level of detail. But if you give it some time and MARTA gets their new consultant on board with respect to the streetcar east extension and that final design, the 30% plans showed all of the access that exists along the east side corridor from Irwin up to Ponce as on the transit side of the corridor, that remains. And it's been specifically designed to make it as safe as possible for crossing that transit guideway. But if you're talking in a different geography, then that's going to be something that we may not get to that level of detail. We probably won't, but and in a lot of cases in, say, the Northwest, the trail isn't even there yet. So I'll assume you don't live in the Northwest. But yeah, we'll be looking at some of that kind of stuff, but I don't think that we'll get to that level of detail with the big planning study that we're talking about tonight.
Thanks, John. We're going to go to Natalie. And her question is, after spending over a year on the study with all of the recommendations presented, what force will it have? Will the recommendations have the force of law, or can NIMBYs, not in my backyard, come along, shout it down, and make the whole exercise a waste of time?
Well, Natalie, I appreciate the comment and the perspective. The planning work that has been done, Beltline has done, 15, 16, 17 years of planning now. We have our sub-area master plans. Those end up getting adopted into the comprehensive development plan of the city of Atlanta, which, from a land use perspective, it's guidance. We haven't really done much in the way of zoning. Zoning is ordinance, so there's, but you can't have the zoning unless it aligns with the land use. So there's that side of things. Nothing exists outside of a political environment. There's no such thing as a political vacuum. It always gets filled. So I can't say that, to your second point, what would happen over the course of time. It's just that it's going to be, we try to do the best planning work that we can do and try to educate and try to bring everybody along to make sure that we can deliver something that everybody's looking for. And that's a critical element of it as well. So that's why we do all the engagement we do. Nate.
You bet. This question is from Patrick. With regards to, I'm kind of reframing it a little bit, but we talked a little about the technology being light rail, streetcar light rail. And we know that there was a decision point when that was made. Patrick's asking, where can I access the transit study that includes alternatives to light rail?
So there's been a couple different attempts at that over the course of time. You can go back to the original Tier 1 environmental impact statement and the record of decision associated with it. That the outcome of that record of decision was that the Beltline loop would basically follow the abandoned transit corridors or the abandoned freight rail corridors, and that the technology would be a light rail streetcar type of vehicle. It would be a steel wheel, steel rail. Additional planning and environmental work was done with the Tier 2 environmental documents that Atlanta Beltline did. We did about 16 miles worth of environmental documents from, say, 2013 to 2017. That, again, was looking at light rail technology and building out that streetcar system plan. And then most recently in 2019, Beltline published the transit task force. I forget what it was called exactly, but it was basically a blue ribbon panel that was put together to talk about transit technology on the Beltline. It looked at bus rapid transit, it looked at streetcar light rail, and it looked at autonomous vehicles. And basically at the time in 2019, it kind of, I don't want to say dismissed, but that's effectively what happened. It dismissed the autonomous vehicle as not being ready yet. And then, so it was really a comparison between a bus and a rail type of technology, and the consensus of that blue ribbon panel was that a streetcar light rail would be the technology, was the appropriate technology for the Beltline as had been planned. So you can get all of that off of our website, I am pretty sure.
Great, thank you, Sean. We have about 44 questions in the Q&A, and I'm trying to pick the questions that are most related to the Beltline Transit Study, not necessarily broader Beltline, and not necessarily the streetcar east extension or the existing downtown streetcar, unless we have time to get to those. So let's see here. And Sean can testify here. There's so much action in here with upvoting that.
Yeah, everything's moving.
So bear with me just a second here. Okay, I found it. This is from Alan. All right. Does this study take wayfinding into account? As is, just moved on me again.
I'm trying to find it in the first place.
Gone. Where did it go? All right, y'all.
Well, this is a good problem to have, that there's a lot of people interested to ask the question. So,
Yeah, I'm gonna copy it and take it out of there so that I don't lose it while I'm reading it. All right, you ready, Sean?
yes,
All
go.
right. Does this study take wayfinding into account? As is, it is not clear for new users that you can access MARTA within somewhat walkable distance from the Beltline. More defined and better lit corridors on existing streets would go a long ways in places like the West End.
Yeah, Alan, I hear you. Wayfinding specifically, that usually comes with a final design package, and that's just not where we're going to be with this planning study. But I absolutely hear what you're getting at. We are, kind of an analogy to what you're asking is, like I said, we are going to be looking at our connectivity and how the connections via trail, the connections via transit, and those two different networks, they can all help to figure out how we can make those two more seamless together for lots of different mobility. Again, this is not kind of a tangent now. This is not, one in favor of the other. This is, on some level, we have lots of programs of projects or programs at Beltline that are, to a certain extent, in direct tension with each other, right? The more successful we are with our economic development, whether from trail or from transit, the more expensive the dirt becomes, which makes it more difficult for us to do the affordable housing stuff that we are obligated to be doing. So sorry for that tangent, but that's, what we're trying to do here is, it's not transit instead of trail, it's transit because it's bigger than trail. And it's complementary to it and supplementary to it. So with respect to wayfinding, no, but the connectivity issues that I'm kind of gleaning from your question, that's definitely front and center of this planning study.
All right, and Sean, I'm going to go to a question from Logan. What I've done is I've sorted by most recent.
Okay.
Helps you. It's helped me from having to jump around so much. How much do
So
we
we're at the
anticipate?
top. Yeah, I see
we're
it.
gonna top. Yep. How much do we anticipate transit needing to deviate from the trail in the Northwest, or can that not be determined until post-study?
Yeah, Logan, thank you. I can't answer that question now because we haven't even really identified the alignments. We've identified, the swath. And so, generally speaking, we're looking at, CSX corridor, we're looking at adjacent to CSX corridor. We're looking at Norfolk Southern corridor. We're looking at adjacent to CSX or Norfolk Southern corridor. And then we're looking at some other things, and we haven't really defined what those other things are yet. So by all means, if you guys have ideas, shoot them our way over to engage@atlbeltline.org. Sorry, Nate. And, we'll, again, this is part of what we're doing, is trying to identify where in the Northwest, where those go. And so I can't really tell you yet what that offset's going to be, but you get a sense as to how we're kind of approaching this.
All right, we're going to move down to Lauren Miller's question at 7:11 p.m. In the last slide Sean did, it said this study is going until 2025. When is the ideal construction start date, or when do you think that will be? Excuse me. P.S. I shared my link with the community, so not all questions are from Lauren Miller. We have about 6 Lauren Millers in the list here, so this may not be the same Lauren Miller we just spoke to.
Somehow I get the feeling that it's all one Howard, though. I love you, buddy. Lauren, right now, there is not yet a program for construction coming out of the other side of this planning study. There is more MARTA funding stream, but as we are working through tier 1 and tier 2 of the more MARTA program, this study will be done, let's see here, no later than June of 2025. So there's still some time until MARTA program gets into the tier 2 potentially from that point. So I can't answer that question right now, unfortunately. You know, it would be awesome if we can secure some significant federal funding for all of this. And I know those conversations are going on, but it's just not something that we're in a that I can't definitively answer your question. I'm sorry.
Okay, we're going to move to Matthew's two-part question. The first part is really about technology. So we've touched on it a little bit, if you want to touch on it or not.
Sure.
I'm going to read the entire question, give you a little more time for a drink of water there. Given that MARTA changed the light rail projects at Clifton and Campbellton to rapid bus lines, will ABI in this study weigh in on the most appropriate vehicle choices for Beltline Transit as part of the study? And let me just stop there for a second.
Okay. Yeah. One of the questions is, you know, the downtown Atlanta streetcar uses a Siemens S70 vehicle. There's 4 of them in the current fleet. With the expansion of the East streetcar extension, there would be a need to acquire, I forget what the number is, but we'd probably have to double that number, if not a little bit more. So say 8 to 10 total vehicles. The S70 is not made anymore. Siemens replaced it with, I think, the S700. It looks very similar from the outside, but it's got some different configurations on the inside. But it's still and even though we have the short version of that vehicle, it's still a relatively large vehicle, and not all of it is low floor. So there's other vehicles that are potentially solutions there. We're going to have conversations with MARTA. MARTA's light rail standards design requirements are based off of the existing vehicles, rightfully. And so if there are changes, they'd either have to be backwards compatible or there'd have to be modifications made as well. So I think that gets at that question from Matthew.
Okay, and then the second part of Matthew's question is, will ABI comment on the green rail bed and promote it and have the consultant do any study on how to incorporate it? It has been in all of our renderings into MARTA's plans.
Yes, and so we Atlanta Beltline Inc. Are very proud of our greenway, and we want it to remain as green as possible. We are very, very interested in seeing a full grass bed track as the guideway wherever possible. You know, underneath Freedom Parkway, for example, it doesn't make any sense to put down grass because the sun will never see it, which is why it's in the condition it is. But at the same time, you know, I'm not a big fan of AstroTurf, but that could help out. So there's lots of different ways that we can do that. We're having conversations with MARTA. Right now, we're between, at least to my knowledge, MARTA has not executed the contract yet with their final design team, but I think that's on the order of days and weeks, not months. So as that project starts to ramp up, we'll get a lot more into those details. For the purposes of the Beltline study that we're talking about tonight, the 13, 14 miles, you know, we'll have a typical section, but it's not going to be there for the purposes of detailed design and aesthetics. It's going to be there for the purposes of it kind of extruding a typical section through an area to figure out what's in the way and what isn't, and what some of the impacts are going to look like. So that's really where we're going to be from a perspective of grass track. But absolutely, grass track is a very key point to making sure we do this right.
Thanks, Sean. We're going to take the question from Nathan at 7:13 p.m. and then we're going to go to Brian, who's live on the phone in just a moment, or live with his hand raised. The question is, are you working with any agencies that have experience with a comprehensive streetcar network, or just MARTA? I grew up somewhere with excellent streetcar coverage, winding through narrow city streets, and let's just say it is slightly better than anything I've seen in the US, particularly Atlanta. Does the study intend to have some outreach component to agencies that are more experienced than MARTA?
Let's say yes. there are, okay, so our consultant team is very accomplished with not just domestic work, but I believe some international work on the streetcar front, definitely North America. So I think that there's a lot of experience there that we're planning to draw from. One of the things that MARTA did in the context of planning for the Streetcar East extension was they had their own planning team, but they also hired a European tram planning firm called IDOM, who actually has a footprint here in Atlanta, and had a study published. And again, you can look to the streetcareast.com website, and you can see some of the presentations that reference what came out of that. What came out of that IDOM, I can't remember what it is, IDOM, that came out of that study. So we have that as a reference. We have our consultant team and their expertise with their experience around the country, around the continent, if not the world. And, there's lots of other people that keep informing this. So people like you that are apparently European and have that experience are, obviously we're looking for your continued engagement as well. Nate?
All right, thanks, Sean. And Brian, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hey, how you doing? Good job. I like tonight's feedback. I just had 2 questions, if I may. I know it may be too early for this one, but I do see 2 potential opportunities that we need to look at on the South Loop at the RDA intersection and the I-75-85 bridge going, past Pittsburgh Yards. Can you estimate like how that analysis is gonna come out? Is that too early or no? And then my second question.
Let me get one question at a time, Brian, so I don't forget one answering the
Okay.
other. Thanks for coming tonight. I had every expectation you'd be here. I love you, brother. I would tell you that I can't answer that question yet. This is the kickoff. As we get into the work, we'll be looking at Northwest, we'll be looking at Southwest, we'll be looking at Southeast. And so we'll be having different meetings with the community as we build our outreach plan. So just, I hate to say it this way, but please be patient with us, but I guarantee you that we'll be having that conversation. What was your second question, buddy?
Okay, so the second question will be like in regards to I'm not being negative, but I'm being positive because we're being positive tonight. Towards the NIMBYs, how is ABI and the groups making sure that neighborhoods that are paying for this too, where we know some people don't want to see rail in their neighborhoods, but some people do. So how are we protecting both voices, if that makes sense?
Sure, I hear you. So through these engagement opportunities, we give everybody that has an opinion the opportunity to share it. We have lots of opportunities for engagement over the course of the next, I keep saying 2 years, but until June of 25, so say year and a half, I guess. We are always in this position, like I mentioned earlier, about tension between either competing interests or competing programs or competing opinions. So we've managed to be able to deliver some really successful infrastructure that I'd say the vast majority of the city is really appreciative of. And I think the way that we conduct ourselves gets us to that point. So with engagement being front and center, with equity being front and center, we should be able to find a way through, mitigate impacts. We're not going to be able to change the minds of everybody. But we hope to be able to educate and at least have a conversation and carry that information received from all parties into the document.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for your question, Brian. All right, I'm going now to Casey. Will the transit study consider financing options for the project? Will the study consider potential project delivery models such as DB or P3? And you probably explain those better than I could.
Yeah, I'm trying to find the question. Found it. Okay. Yes, there is going to be a financial model, let's call it that, a financial analysis that is performed as part of this study. Part of that will be determining within the, at least we expect this to be part of the performance measurements that we use to help identify, one alignment over the other in the Northwest, for example, and compare that to FTA's capital investment grants program and make sure that, we're as competitive as we can possibly be. P3 stands for public-private partnership. And then the question just jumped and I don't remember what the other acronym was, so I can't explain
DB.
that. Design build, I assume, is what they're getting at with that. We probably wouldn't do a design build in terms of delivery. Most streetcar properties, at least in America, are looking more at a construction manager at risk type of delivery model, or a design bid build, which is kind of the standard. You got to have a full set, 100% construction documents. You put it out to bid, you award it to the low bidder. That is kind of the standard. And I believe that's the model that MARTA is at least following right now with respect to Streetcar East. Whether that's the model that moves forward with future expansions of the streetcar remains to be seen. But hopefully that answers your question.
57 open questions. I'm trying to find ones that are.
Looks like I'm going to have a lot of typing to do later too.
Yeah, you are, buddy. At least you don't have to use your voice when you do that. All right, we had a question about how climate, if I can find it again, is climate change being considered as part of the study? And I think it was from Nancy, 719. Are climate change implications a part of this study? For example, with summers getting hotter and hotter, not having shade due to the loss of trees on the Beltline could make the trail almost unusable for portions of the day or year. Will you propose mitigation plans for this? So I'm kind of inferring that the concern has to do with maybe a loss of trees when transit's built out.
Sure. That's a reasonable question. Yeah, with the 30% plans that exist, there is a known loss of tree canopy on the East Side corridor. On the Beltline Transit Study, the 13-mile planning study we're talking about tonight, we're not going to be getting to that level of detail. We're not going to be doing a design and then counting the number of trees that are impacted. Sorry, my wife's calling me. The East extension, because there is 30% design and then going into final design, that is going to have, because it's a design project, it's going to have the ability and the need to quantify that and then determine what that mitigation is. And it's already been determined that there will be full Atlanta tree ordinance recompense. At least that's my understanding. So all the caliper inches that are lost will be replaced along the corridor. So I think that is one of the things that we do with our trail corridor too, whether it's us participating in that recompense and paying or partnering with others like, I don't know, Atlanta Public Schools or even MARTA, and providing space for which they need to find a place for new trees to account for recompense. So yes, from a tree perspective, I hear you. From a climate change perspective, though, providing transit on a much larger network is probably going to be as effective, if not more effective, then, we can, especially if we're replacing the trees, as opposed to people driving around in their own cars or, and that kind of thing. So I'll just leave it there. Sorry, I'm starting to ramble.
Yeah, no problem, Sean. And all right, this isn't necessarily directly related to the study, and but this is going to be 7:36 p.m. Matt Ekman. So really hitting at how funding is used at the Beltline. So the question is, it will take $4 billion to build the loop with a major source of funding from real estate taxes. Wouldn't this impact your mission to provide affordable housing? You can have affordable housing with access to the trail that has bike, scooter commuting, and expand modern mobility programs to help anyone who's unable to physically get to a station, including those who don't live on the Beltline or a potential rail station.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to solve problems. The approach that we've been given the marching orders for is this. Affordable transportation is a critical kind of complement to affordable housing. We're putting in affordable housing in as many places as we can. I'm the engineer, I shouldn't be speaking to that, but the connection between the two is a critical point. Kind of acknowledge that. But
And just to jump in there, Sean, too, I think what I wanted to kind of address there is that
please,
we are currently on a good pace and we expect to meet our affordable housing goals by the year 2030. And this is a different pot of money for this study. It's a different pot of money for more MARTA. So these are not, these are not things that can't be done together. So.
Oh, okay. I missed that. I missed that little point of. I can't even think anymore. Sorry. Yeah, the funding pots are, let's call them mutually exclusive. We cannot use the federal transit planning monies to build affordable housing instead of putting it into this studies, right? So the $3.5 million worth of this project are not able to be put into trail. It's not able to be put into affordable housing. It's not able to be put into economic development directly. So, and then funding streams that we have for trail are kind of mutually exclusive from transit. And so if that was the nuance, that was the word I'm looking for. I missed that in the first part. Thanks, Nate.
No problem. And we'll take one more question here before we move into our closeout. And you may not have this, Sean, but the 7:34 p.m. question from Mark Smith: where are the results of the survey that was completed last year at Irwin Street? I think they're referring to the temporary closure.
Sure. Mark Smith. Okay. Yeah. I honestly, that was a Atlanta DOT survey that was completed. I don't know if that has been published yet. Honestly, I don't know if that's been published. I would tell you to, I'm not even sure. I think, tell you what, Nate, leave that for the Q&A report, and I should be able to come up with an answer to that, because I just don't know right now.
No problem. I accidentally marked it answered, so Rashida, you can flag that one. I appreciate it. It's 7:55 according to the little clock at the bottom of my computer. We never stood a chance, Sean. We got 56 questions. Luckily, you won't have to use your vocal cords to answer them.
This is telling me.
Yeah, but we're going to go ahead. We're going to list them all. We're going to post them at beltline.org/meetings. It could be a couple weeks if I'm being honest and realistic here. So bear with us, but we will get to those. In the meantime, you're always welcome to communicate with us at engage@atlbeltline.org. We do have a little more polling just to kind of close out and put a bow on all this. So we're going to pop that open. We'll share some contact information and we'll have you guys out of here on time as promised. So 2 more questions. Was the information presented tonight helpful in changing your perception and or understanding of the Beltline project? And this can be, this is a bit more broad than the earlier question, which was purely transit focused. All right, and the pace is slowing, so I guess we'll go ahead and lock that in. So I got a yes at 58%, a no at 33%, no opinion at 8%. For the no's out there, if there's aspects of the overall Beltline project that are things that you want to follow up on, or you need more clarity on, or anything like that, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at engage@atlbeltline.org. One more question here. Just generally speaking, did you learn something new tonight? All right, we'll lock that in at about 60% participation. Still got 87 folks on the line, 88 people. And we got 78% yes, 11% no, and some folks that need some more clarity. Again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. This is just the beginning of the study. We got a long ways to go. We'll move on to the next slide. I want to share a little contact information with you all. We use engage@atlbeltline.org because it's easy to remember, but if you want specific email addresses for Sean or myself, Sean is our principal engineer. He's a project manager lead on this study. His email is sgreen@atlbeltline.org. Got his phone number up there at 404-477-3667. I am the community engagement project manager, so I'm coordinating the community engagement efforts around this project. My email is nsoldat, that's SOLDAT, @atlbeltline.org, or my office number is 404-477-3552. I want to give a big thanks to Sean for battling a head cold and doing a whole bunch of talking. Thanks for sticking with us and drinking lots of water and being hydrated. But a bigger thanks really to the audience. This has been incredibly engaging. We have a lot of conversations that we're going to be having with you all and others. Stay engaged, spread the word about the study. We appreciate you all coming out tonight, and we'll see you all on the Beltline.